Howdy guys, Nathan coming at you from the TFL studios, deep in the heart of my home. This is actually a satellite studio temporarily. In the very near future, I'm hoping to be back in the studios with everybody else to give you higher quality, better sounding video. But for the time being, well, this is the new norm, isn't it? All right, now let me tell you what we're going to be doing today. It's going to be pretty cool because we're talking about the top 10 most beautiful cars ever. This isn't necessarily the fastest or the best built, but it is, in terms of aesthetics, what I consider to be some of the most beautiful vehicles out there. Now, a lot of you guys are going to say, no, you're wrong. You might be right in some cases, but I guarantee you, you will all agree with at least one of these picks amongst the 10. Now, there are a few parameters I had to throw out there. First of all, there are so many vehicles going all the way back pre-World War II, I should say, all the way to today, that I decided to eliminate a whole bunch of those years, and I'm starting at around 1960, and I'm moving up into the 80s. That's it. Just a couple decades worth of time, because in my mind, that was the golden age of what I consider modern automotive exterior design. Now, some of these cars are remarkable for other reasons as well, but we're just going to talk about the designers, a little bit about the engineering, and about how absolutely awesomely beautiful these vehicles are. So, without any further delay, now by the way, it is a top 10, but the first 9, I don't care what order they're in really. But number 1, the number 1 on this list, I do care about. We'll get to that in a minute. So let's start. Number 10, the 1967 Toyota 2000 GT. I know a lot of you guys don't know what this vehicle is, and you really should look it up. It is spectacular. Now, it was designed by Hiro Kawana. I want to say these names right, so I have it spelled out phonetically, but I think I totally screwed it up. And Satoru Nozaki. What's interesting about this car is that initially it came from Yamaha. The idea of building this type of sports car and having Yamaha work on the engine, build it up, make it faster. And they initially went to Nissan with the idea, and Nissan turned them down. Then they went to Toyota, and Toyota said, well, all right, but we want our engineers working on it as well. We want our people designing it. So it was a collaborative thing between Yamaha and Toyota. And what they managed to build was an absolutely gorgeous machine, just luscious. And it performed quite well. It wasn't the fastest car out there. Now, we are talking about, the late 1960s. So it put out 148 horsepower, 129 pound-feet of torque. It was a straight 6. Really not exactly what I would call a scorcher, but it had a 5-speed manual transmission, and then the later models had a 3-speed automatic as an option. Inside and out, it was just beautiful. And it is one of the few cars on this list that was actually used in a James Bond movie, You Only Live Twice, which that car had a very unique feature. It was a convertible. The only convertibles made were specifically for that movie. Otherwise, they were all hardtops, they were all fastbacks, and they were all beautiful. So I want you guys to have a look at that one. It is, just the lines, the way they flow over the fender, those unique headlights. Yeah, it's just a knockout. The next one, number 9 on our list, is the 1974 Lamborghini Countach. Now, a lot of you guys are going to say, well, yeah, okay, we all know the Lamborghini Countach, and, the one you're talking about is one of the earlier ones. It's actually the earliest. And what about all the wings and stuff? Yuck. The original shape of this vehicle is gorgeous and very futuristic, something that's out of Blade Runner. Really cool stuff. It was designed by Marcello Gandini, who, by the way, designed a ton of amazing cars. And there's another car on this list, by the way, that Gandini was responsible for as well. And it is the ultimate wedge shape. before you slap on the wings and the extra outlets and all the ground effects, wider tires and blah, 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 it was a very clean design. In fact, the only thing that stood out on it was the air intakes on the sides for the massive V12 engine. Now, initially, it put out 370 horsepower and 6 carburetors, you know, typical Lamborghini. And this is a vehicle that replaced the beautiful Miura, which should be on this list, but I just didn't have the space for it. It was updated through the years, and some say that it was putting out well over 500 horsepower before it was done. This is a car that was built for a long time. It went all the way to 1990. Now, up until that point in time, the car got larger and larger because they just kept slapping on components, wings, and all this other stuff. And I think that they really took away from the beautiful aesthetics of that vehicle. You know, when we're talking about that V12, initially put out 370 horsepower. That's what I meant to say. You know, you might not think that's a lot, but keep in mind that back in the early 70s, that was extraordinary. Let's move on. The 1961 Jaguar EType Roadster. Oh. Not only do I think that this is an absolutely gorgeous vehicle, but Enzo Ferrari himself, the old man, the cranky old man who loved nothing but Ferraris, said, this is one of the most beautiful cars he's ever seen. His words. And he was absolutely right. The interesting thing about it, it was designed by Malcolm Sayer, and it was designed very quickly. It wasn't one of those things that sat in a shop and was designed over the course of 2 or 3 years with clay models and everything else. No, they put this thing together very quickly. It was a design that went from, you know, the back of a napkin or a piece of paper all the way up to the actual prototype in a very short amount of time. It was also extremely fast for the time. It had a top speed of 150 miles per hour. Put out 240 horsepower and 283 pound-feet of torque. It was incredible. But the vehicle I'm talking about, by the way, there were two. There was a Roadster and there was a 2+2 coupe. Now, while I tend to prefer coupes over convertibles, Roadsters, the convertible is just gorgeous. That's the one I'm talking about. The coupe was sort of unusual. Actually had a really unusual rear hatch that opened to the side as opposed to like a regular hatchback does today. And when they did the 2+2 coupe to add people, they stretched it out and they ruined the lines. It looked really bulbous and unattractive. But the original, it was just beautiful to look at. The next on our list is the 1963 to 1967 C2 version of the Chevrolet Corvette, specifically the Chevy Corvette Stingray. Guys, this was the most beautiful Corvette ever made. Now, there are lots of different types, and a lot of people will say that the GS version of this car, which was a racing edition, is the best looking one because it has monster tires and it's all scalloped out and everything else. And I might agree with that. I mean, it was just gorgeous and badass at the same time. But I really like the simplicity. Not simplicity, that's the wrong word. I like the styling and how direct the design was of the original. Now, it's an interesting car because there's a lot of design that went into it from its past. In the late 1950s, there was the Stingray Racer. It was a prototype concept, and that was actually designed by Pete Brock, among other people. There's also another car called the Q car and the XP87. And those vehicles, if you look at them, you can see the lines and a lot of the design of the Corvette Stingray from 63 to 67 in terms of its overall design. But it was one of those vehicles that had so many innovations from the beginning of its life to the end of its life that it really brought Corvette from being a vehicle that was more of a grand tourer in my mind all the way to a serious race car. And it did that all in one generation, the C2 generation. By the way, Zora Duntov, a lot of you guys are like, oh yeah, he's the man. Yeah, that's right. He was the head engineer on Corvette. And that car had so many different engines, everything from it had from 250 horsepower all the way up to 430 horsepower. And a lot of people said that the larger engine could actually put out over 500 horsepower, that General Motors was actually holding back on their numbers. There were 3 and 4-speed manual transmissions. There was a 2-speed power glide automatic. There's a ton of different options for it. Had a completely different set of components underneath the vehicle from 63 to 67. So the suspension geometry changed. A lot of other things changed. But the outside of that car, that shark-like design, that flat, beautiful, crisp design remained the same. And by the way, the first version of that had a split window fastback design to it, which Zora Duntov hated, and he had that removed pretty damn quickly. So those split window ones are worth a lot of money. Let's move on to the 1971 BMW CSI. Now this is the E9 BMW, and its actual design credits are kind of fuzzy because they didn't really credit just one person with this vehicle. Its design goes back to the BMW 2000C and 2000 CS 4-cylinder coupes, and they're ugly. They are. I mean, the front end of those cars is ghastly. But the 3.0 CSI, I stands for injection, that was built in the late 60s, early 70s, is extraordinary. If you look at the greenhouse of the car, how thin the pillars are, the way the front end is designed, the way it pulls in, the overall shape of it is everything in my mind that a modern sport sedan / sports coupe should be. So the earlier versions of that car, just dynamite. Now, in terms of who built what, Bertone did do some of the design, and also Wilhelm Hofmeister. He did some of the design specifically to certain components on the vehicle, but if you look, you can really see that there is a little bit of Italian flair with that car. Just a beautiful car. One of my favorites. Now, by the way, this entire list, it could easily be Italian cars. But what I decided to do was make sure that this list had vehicles that are still coming from an automaker we know. So, Izzo Grifo, De Tomaso, a lot of these other automakers that are no longer building vehicles, Plymouth, what have you, I decided just to kind of put those aside. You also notice not a lot of muscle cars on this, even though I do love muscle cars, but there are a lot of extraordinary vehicles. And the next one is one of my favorites. As a kid, I actually had a poster of this car in rally form on my wall. And back then, I didn't even understand what the WRC was all about, or any type of rallying, really. It's 1973 to 1978 Lancia Stratos HF Stradale. The HF actually stands for high fidelity, and it was their street version. Stradale is for the street. And this was a car that was designed from the ground up to be a rally vehicle, but they did have to, as a requirement, build enough of them specifically for the street that they had a run of around 500. I think it was a little bit less than that. This is another one of those wedge designs. Now, for some of you guys, you might look at it and think it's a little odd looking because it has a really short wheelbase. And it's a very narrow cockpit. It's kind of a jet age, rocket age design in terms of its wedge shape. But this thing had a Ferrari engine in it. And its stubby dimensions and really sharp nose and everything else led to it having very good aerodynamics and being able to house a very strong suspension. This thing traveled through Africa. This thing won tons of rally races, well over a dozen rally races. It took from a lot of big manufacturers. It was even able to take rally stages from all-wheel drive cars of the time. That's how good it was. I'm just saying. It had the Ferrari-sourced V6 that made, in street form, 188 to 190 horsepower, give or take. But the ones that were racing on the track, they even had a turbo version. They were just going double, even almost triple that amount of power. Ridiculous amounts of power out of a fairly small engine. It, according to experts, was one of the iconic designs if you think about the mixture of Italian, rallying, and sports cars. That is the iconic design. There's some really cool versions of it that have these massive pods in the front full of headlights and everything else, and it still looks good. with the larger wheels and the extra fender flares and the big wing and everything, still looks good. And yet, if you look at the ones that were built just for the street, they look amazing. Very cool car. Once again, something from my youth. Now, the next vehicle on this list is the 1964 and a half all the way to about 1969, actually going into the early 70s, the first generation Ford Mustang. I know what you guys are saying. Ford Mustang? Really? Hear me out. Ford Mustang, in my mind, in 1969, was the peak of its absolutely gorgeous design. Now, granted, I did have a 65 Mustang. It's a whole other story, but it's the same vehicle, basically. Same platform, wheelbase was about the same, but they did get stretched in both length and width. And by the time it got to 1969 and they built the Boss 302, the quad headlights, that big grille, the overall design of that vehicle, if you look, the side hump, the way it goes up and over the rear fender, everything they did with that car absolutely says American muscle, but American good-looking muscle. Anywhere I go in the world, anywhere I've been to in the world, if I talk about cars, and if I mention a Ford Mustang, a lot of people immediately think of that one because it was one of the most iconic-looking cars out there. And by the way, the late 60s Boss 302, one of the best handling Mustangs ever. Funny thing, later on when they built the Boss 302 again, one of the best handling Mustangs ever. It was a great balance between performance and handling, especially in the vehicle that had a solid rear axle. I mean, God, they were able to get some good handling out of that car. But the look of it was just incredible. Now, there are a lot of designers that were tied into the Mustang from the early days all the way through to today. But I will mention one person that helped make the Mustang happen in the first place, and that is Lee Iacocca, for those of you who don't know. Yes, he's the guy who eventually went to Chrysler and helped that company out. The Mustang is really apple pie. Yeah, I guess you could say the Corvette is too, to a certain degree, but there's something about a Mustang that it's just all American. Yes, I love the Camaro too, by the way. I think it's a gorgeous car, especially the 68 and 69s, but man, that Mustang, just beautiful. All right. I had to mention Ferrari. I had to. There's no way this list would be complete without it. And there are so many Ferraris to choose from that are just beautiful. But the 1968 Ferrari 365 GTB, otherwise known as the Daytona, is just gorgeous. Now, it's designed by Leonardo Florvarati, and I probably got his name wrong. I'm terrible with pronunciation. And it was introduced at the Paris Auto Show in 1968, and it blew everybody away. This is a car that, for those of you who are children of the 80s and remember some of the television shows, there was one called Miami Vice, and that show had a black one running around. Here's the funny thing about that. Actually, there were a couple real Daytonas that they used in that show, but there were also some fake ones that were actually built on Corvette platforms. And when Ferrari found out, they got so angry. A, they sued the company that built the knockoffs because they looked just like the real thing. And B, through some sort of special agreement with the television production company, they replaced that car with the then brand new Ferrari Testarossa. So go figure. I actually remember the episode they actually blew the car up with a rocket.
Sold.
This is putting a punctuation on, we don't want the car anymore. But it was beautiful, just beautiful. And whether you saw the racing version of it or the one with the knockoff wire wheels or whichever one you saw, they were striking. Not a very complex design, but everything had to do with the subtlety of the car, the unusual setup of the headlights, the way they're covered, the front end, how it just arcs up gently, and it's not super, super curvy. It's a little bit more of a solid line that bends. Very different type of design. The rear end of that car is magnifique. This vehicle had the absolutely amazing Ferrari 4.4 liter V12 Colombo engine. It was a derivative of it. put out 347 horsepower. Now you got to remember, this is 1968. That thing was a beast. 5-speed manual transmission. What a beautiful, beautiful car. The thing about it is that there are very few cars in my mind that look good in any color. This is one of those cars that can pull off any color, and it looks very different. Some cars just can't pull off white, as an example. This one absolutely can. Beautiful car. Let's move on. Now this next one, for those of you who might be disagreeing with me with what I'm about to say, you have to understand that aside from the fact I'm an old man, this car was incredibly important to the American market because it could prove that anybody could afford a car that looked almost as good as a Corvette, or in some cases better, so it depends on your perspective, and yet was affordable, easy to drive, fun to drive, could race, and could win. I'm talking about, of course, the Nissan/Datsun 240Z. All right, yep, go ahead and yell at your computer. I know a lot of you guys are going to disagree for this list having this vehicle on there, but I think it's just gorgeous. What a great design. It's not without controversy. There are a lot of different versions. First of all, some people call it some people. It's also known as the Fairlady Overseas or the Nissan Fairlady Z. It became the 260Z and the 280Z as displacement went up. The car grew in size. It became a 2+2. And once that happened, just like with vehicles like the Jaguar, it ruined the lines and made it look bulbous and really unattractive. But its original version was just beautiful. And it competed with Porsche, BMW, Alfa Romeo, you name it. Really, really pretty car. I really like the way they were able to get the lines to curve slightly throughout the vehicle. But the way they did the front end is sort of like a Ferrari. The way they did the roof, sort of like a Jaguar. You can kind of see all these things, but they brought it together in such a beautiful, cohesive package. It's just bonkers the way they did it. This is also the car that I think put Nissan on the map, Datsun on the map in the United States. Before then, they weren't really known for any serious sports cars. Yeah, they did have a sports car before then, but it didn't really sell that well. This was something different, and man, just a beautiful car. A couple things about it that you should know. It didn't have a ton of horsepower. It was a straight six, had dual side carburetors, one barrel. I remember that only because I worked on a few of them. Wasn't really the fastest car on the planet. It was more about handling than anything else, and man, could it handle. I actually drove one of these on the racetrack, and I crashed one, but it was a 240, and it really moved nicely. Such a responsive car. One of those that just did a really good job with making sure the driver was fully in control the entire time. It was pretty incredible. By the way, it was designed by Yoshihiko Matsuo. I think I got that one right. And it was just a sensation. So 2.4 liter, hence 240. And it just grew up from there. That engine put out 151 horsepower and 146 pound-feet of torque. It was super smooth. It was responsive, and it was fairly economical, for the time. It's a fairly large displacement engine in a fairly small car. Just absolutely the business. Beautiful car. Now, all these other cars on the list can go anywhere on the list, and I would be completely happy with it. But number one is, I won't even say arguably, it is the most beautiful car ever produced. Not only is it just a work of art, it's rolling sensuality, but it actually has some incredible innovations in it. And it proves that the Italians had a lot of amazing ideas in the early days going through the 60s. And this is one of those cars that absolutely deserves to be known as one of the most beautiful cars ever made. As a matter of fact, many people who do this, automotive journalists, people who are automotive photographers, even people who work at other automotive agencies would agree with me. that the Alfa Romeo Tipo 33 Stradale is the most beautiful car ever made. The one I'm talking about is the 1968. They were built from 67 to 69. And this was a Scalgoni design, Franco Scalgoni. And it was a real limited run. They only built like 18 of these. And it's an interesting thing because if you look at the car, now, first of all, I mean, the lines on that car are absolutely luscious. There is no wasted line on this car. Everything about the curvaceous nature of it leads to what was good about design and what is good about design. You can see a lot of that in modern classics, like a lot of the new stuff that Alfa Romeo has been designing, especially their concept cars. Speaking of concept cars, the interesting thing about the Tipo 33, by the way, that means type 33, is that that platform was actually used in some absolutely famous concept cars, some that people begged Alfa Romeo to build, one of which was the Caribou and the other one was the Iguana. They are really cool, unique cars that inspired other manufacturers to build cars that are very similar to it. So you'll look at that and go, oh, okay, yeah, okay, I could see the lines going into certain other cars that went out there. So this car had a lot of really cool stuff going on, including just on the design on the outside. You were able to see the engine, which was this tiny little 2-liter V8 with these velocity stacks coming up, and they're beautiful. And you could actually see it through the plexiglass cover in the back, and obviously people are still doing stuff like that today. It was one of the earliest cars to have a 6-speed manual gearbox, to have butterfly doors. This is a design they had to put in there because there's no other way to make the doors work quite right. It had a maximum horsepower, 227 horsepower, which isn't a lot, but the car didn't weigh much. And that was way up at 8,800 RPM. That thing screamed like a motorcycle. Made its debut at the Paris Salon de l'Auto in October 1967. It was an absolute sensation, and most people thought, okay, this is just going to be another race car. And the thing is, once again, it was built for the street, Stradale, and there was another Tipo 33 that it was based on, and that was the race car. So this is the street-going car, and it is just beautiful to look at. Now, I welcome debate on a lot of these that I've talked about, but I'm going to maintain that I stand by what I said when it comes to number one. The 1968 Alfa Romeo Tipo 33 Stradale is the most beautiful car ever made. One final thing about that car, if you're looking at, because once again, 67 to 69, a very short production line, you'll notice that there's kind of two different Stradales. There's the single headlight in the bezels, and then there's the double. Now, the funny thing is, the earlier ones actually had the double, and the later one had the single. It's weird to me because it looks like it should be the other way around. So if you're looking that up, you'll notice that. You'll also notice that there's these black screens. They're mesh that sit behind the wheel, both up in front and in back. And that's for venting. And for some reason, they managed to make it look really cool as opposed to really ugly. And it's something that was way ahead of its time in terms of removing heat from the vehicle and at the same time maintaining an absolute beautiful design aesthetic. All right, that's enough about that. That's enough about this whole thing. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say about your favorites. I would love to see them down below. Remember, I was going just from 1960 to the early 80s, basically, late 80s. But for the most part, we are talking about that chunk of time. Yes, I wish I could do this list and talk about all the cars. And who knows, maybe we'll come back to this and talk about pre-war vehicles, because there's plenty of them. For the Fast Lane Car, this is Nathan. Don't forget to go to TFLcar.com for news, views, real-world reviews, and more of this. I'll see you next time.